She said, "I still think about you," while holding the man she thought she needed Maury. For a second I honestly wondered if I'd misheard her over the noise, but then she looked straight at me when she said it, her fingers curling tighter into the sleeve of his blazer like she needed something to hold onto while she dropped the grenade. The bar was too warm, packed with bodies and cheap cologne and laughter that felt a little too loud. Fairy lights hung in tangled loops over our heads, and the playlist kept skipping between 2000s throwbacks and whatever was in the charts last week. Her boyfriend, fiancé, technically, had his arm around her shoulders, thumb tracing lazy circles on the bare skin of her upper arm. I could see the engagement ring glint every time she gestured with the hand not currently resting on his chest. My beer felt heavy in my hand, condensation running down onto my knuckles. "What?" I said because my brain was empty and that was the only word it could find. My mouth was dry, but my palms were sweating. My heart did this weird lurching thing, like it wanted to sprint away without the rest of my body. She smelled the same, vanilla and something floral, an ache of familiarity in a room full of people who suddenly felt like strangers. Her eyes flicked between me and him, like she was trying to measure how much trouble she'd get into if anyone else actually registered what she'd just said. He was half-turned, talking to someone from the old uni group, oblivious. Her nails dug into his sleeve. "I still think about you," she repeated, quieter this time, like she was confessing something to the floor. We'd been together for almost 8 years when she left me. I'm 31M, she's 31F, and the guy with the perfect jawline and the expensive watch was, last I heard, 34M his name, Aaron. I'm changing some details and throwing this onto a burner because some of our mutual friends live online and I'd rather not get a bunch of "you good, bro" texts from people who only call me when they're drunk. But I need to get this out somewhere, because ever since she looked at me over his shoulder and said those words, my brain hasn't stopped replaying the whole messy movie of us. Her name is Lily. We met when we were 22 at the world's most boring corporate internship orientation. One of those beige conference rooms in the CBD with stale supermarket muffins, bad coffee, and a guy in a too-tight suit doing icebreakers no one wanted. I was sitting at one of the circular tables near the back, flipping through the welcome pack because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, when someone dropped their lanyard into my lap. "Oh my God, sorry," a voice said, and a hand reached down at the same time I did. Our fingers collided. "Sorry," I said automatically. "Double sorry," she said and laughed, a short, surprised sound, like she hadn't expected to find anything funny in that room either. She was wearing an oversized blazer over a dress that looked a bit too fancy for the fluorescent lighting, like she'd mistaken orientation for networking gala. Her hair was tied back in one of those messy buns that somehow still look intentional. She slid into the chair next to me because, she whispered a minute later, she'd already decided the rest of her table were LinkedIn come to life. When the guy at the front told us all to share one fun fact with your neighbor, I panicked and told her I could peel an orange in one piece. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Prove it," and that's how we spent the next 5 minutes mangling an orange we'd stolen from the sad fruit platter. We found out we were both in the marketing rotation, both living in share houses in the inner west, both more interested in the free food than the company culture spiel. She called herself a creative in captivity. I had no idea what I was, beyond guy who somehow blagged his way into a paid internship. Our first date happened by accident. We left orientation together, discovered we were headed to the same train line, and when the PA announced a delay due to an earlier incident, she suggested we grab a drink instead of standing on the platform breathing in other people's frustration. We ended up at this grimy little bar tucked under bridge, sticky tables, fairy lights that might have been left over from some long-past Christmas. I remember thinking it felt like the kind of place you'd see in a movie where two characters decide to blow up their lives. We didn't blow up our lives that night, we just talked. About stupid things at first, our worst jobs, the weirdest stuff we'd seen in flatmate kitchens, then deeper things. She told me how her parents had split when she was 10 and how she'd learned to pack a whole life into a duffel bag every second weekend. I told her how my parents were still together, stubbornly, in a little house in the suburbs that hadn't changed since I was 5, and how that kind of stability both comforted and bored me. "I don't really do casual," she admitted at one point, swirling the ice in her glass. "I've never been great at the whole, just seeing where it goes thing. I either care too much or I don't care at all." "Same," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I think I skipped that phase everyone talks about where they date around and hook up and stuff. Went from high school girlfriend to broke uni student to here. "So we're both emotionally stunted," she said, grinning. "Great, at least we match." I walked her to her station after. She hugged me goodbye, quick and firm, like we'd known each other longer than a day. On the train home, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, you owe me an orange, BTW." It was like that with her, quick, easy, a series of small jumps that in hindsight feel inevitable. We started having lunch together at work because everyone else is boring. Friday drinks became a standing thing. She'd send me memes during long meetings, little eye-roll emojis when managers said circling back too many times. The actual moment she became my girlfriend was also borderline accidental. We were at her share house because her housemates were away and my place had a broken couch and an even more broken heater. We ordered Thai. Netflix was asking if we were still watching like it didn't know how sticky rice worked. She was lying with her head on my chest, my arm going numb under her when she said, "So if someone asked what we are, what would you say?" My heart did the uncomfortable slam thing. Friends, I tried, and she swatted my chest. Rude. I mean like friends who kiss, I amended. She propped her chin on my sternum and looked at me properly. "I'd like to be your girlfriend," she said, like she was asking if I wanted the last spring roll. "If you want that. If you don't want that, I will take my spring roll and my dignity and go." "Definitely want that," I said too fast. "The girlfriend bit, I mean." "You can have the spring roll, I already ate mine." She smiled, big and soft. "Okay then," she said, "you're my boyfriend." Then she kissed me like she'd already been calling me that in her head for weeks. The first few years were what I think of now as the us against the world era. We were both broke, both figuring out how to be adults. We moved in together at 24 into a one-bedroom apartment above a noisy cafe. The bedroom window faced a brick wall. The shower took 10 minutes to get hot. We bought a second-hand couch off Facebook Marketplace that smelled faintly of someone else's dog, and a mismatched set of plates from an op shop. She called it our starter kit. We made a life, cheap pasta dinners, splitting a bottle of oldie wine on the balcony, complaining about work and laughing about our friends' drama. She'd come home buzzing with ideas for campaigns no one would ever approve. I'd rant about how clients kept changing their minds after we'd already done half the implementation. We were good at being a team. We split chores mostly evenly without creating a spreadsheet. If she worked late, I cooked. If I had a deadline and forgot laundry existed, she'd throw a load on. When one of us got sick, the other turned into an aggressively attentive nurse. I won't pretend it was all perfect montages and pillow fights. We fought, sometimes about little things. Her habit of leaving half-full cups of tea everywhere drove me insane. My tendency to shut down instead of talk when I was stressed drove her just as crazy. Sometimes about bigger things, money, family, how much of our lives we were supposed to share online. But the fights always ended the same. A version of "I love you, I'm sorry, I'm trying." We met each other's families. My mum loved her almost immediately, mostly because Lily offered to help with dishes at the first dinner and laughed at my dad's terrible jokes. Her mum was more reserved, but I earned points every time I turned up with groceries or fixed something in their creaky terrace house. By our 6th year together, we were at that stage where people start dropping, "When are you two getting married?" into conversations like it's a fun party game and not a loaded emotional grenade. We talked about it in that abstract, future way. She said she wasn't in a rush. I said I wanted to wait until we could afford something nicer than a registry office and a pub lunch. We both agreed we wanted kids, someday, which felt comfortably far away. The slow shift started when she moved jobs. Our company had been outsourcing more and more, morale was in the toilet, and when a sleek agency poached her with promises of creative freedom and career growth, she jumped. I was proud genuinely. I helped her practice for the interview, ironed her one decent blazer, waited anxiously for her call. When she rang and said, "I got it," I yelled loud enough that her new boss probably heard through the wall. The agency was a different world. Open plan office, exposed brick, free kombucha on tap, all that. She started coming home more wired, more alive, talking about pitches and clients I'd only see mentioned in the news. "They actually listen to me," she said one night, eyes bright as she waved a fork around. "They ask what I think. They give me weird projects and don't immediately sand all the interesting bits off." "That's awesome," I said and meant it. "You deserve that." She also started talking about a new creative director. Not constantly, not in an obvious, I'm obsessed way, just little mentions, dropped in like seasoning. "Mark said my campaign was refreshingly fearless," she'd say with a half smile. "Mark thinks we're playing it too safe, he wants us to push harder," she'd sigh another night. "Mark's a nightmare in meetings, but he's brilliant," she'd say, rolling her eyes. I'd nod, file the name away as new boss, and not think much more of it. The first time I met him was at her agency's Christmas party, an open bar on a rooftop. Everyone was dressed slightly cooler than me. Lily was in a red dress I'd never seen before, one that made my brain forget what it had been planning to say. "Wow," I managed. She turned, did a little mock twirl. "Too much." "Not enough," I said, honest. "Good answer," she said, kissing me. I could feel eyes on us when we did, that social media generation curiosity about who belongs to who. She dragged me around. introducing me to copywriters and designers and account managers whose names I promptly forgot. Then she stopped, brightened, and said, "This is him, Mark." He was exactly what you'd picture if someone said charismatic agency creative director. Early 30s, sharp jawline, a suit that somehow looked both casual and expensive, salt and pepper hair that would be obnoxious on anyone else but somehow worked on him. "So this is the famous Uthan," he said, sticking his hand out with a grin that suggested we were already in on the same joke. "Only slightly famous," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm, confident. "Nice to finally meet the guy who keeps my girlfriend at the office until 8 p.m. Lily elbowed me lightly. "Ignore him," she told Mark. "He thinks work should stop at 5. Spoken like someone who hasn't found their passion project yet, Mark said, still smiling. He turned back to Lily. "You killed it in that pitch today, by the way. Client loved you." She flushed, pleased. "Team effort," she said. He clinked his glass against hers. "Sure, but you're the glue." There was nothing obviously inappropriate in how he looked at her. It was professional admiration turned up 2 notches. If I hadn't been looking for it, I probably wouldn't have clocked the way his gaze lingered half a beat too long. At the time, I just filed him under slightly intense boss and moved on. The thing about these stories is, when you tell them backwards, everything looks like a sign. At the time, it's just life. The cracks didn't start as affairs or big blow-ups. They started as sighs, as "I'm just tired," as wine poured a little earlier each evening, as work encroaching on everything. "Can we not talk about work for one dinner?" I asked one night, after listening to her rant about a client for 20 minutes while the pasta went cold. She dropped her fork. "I'm sorry," she said, immediately defensive. "I thought you wanted to know what's going on in my life." "I do," I said, "but it feels like that's all we talk about lately. We used to talk about other stuff, dumb stuff." "That's because other stuff is fine," she snapped. "Work is eating me alive, Uthan. I'm trying to process it somewhere that isn't my own head." "I get it," I said, backing off. Even though, if I'm honest, I didn't fully get it. My job was stressful too, but I didn't bring it home like a pet. She'd always been intense, but this was like all the dials had been turned up. She checked her phone constantly. She stayed back at the office more. When I asked if they were understaffed, she said, "No, Mark just trusts me with the big stuff." There was pride there and resentment twisted together. The first time I properly felt that sick, off-kilter sensation in my gut was the night I saw a notification flash on her phone. We were on the couch watching some trashy reality show. Her phone was on the coffee table, lit up with a message preview. "Mark still buzzing from today. Couldn't have done it without you. Drinks next week. Just us, my shout." It would have been nothing, maybe, if it hadn't been just us. Or if the texts I'd seen before hadn't been increasingly familiar. "You looked incredible in that meeting. You've got this," at 11 p.m. before a pitch. "Do you guys hang out outside work much?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced at the phone, then away. "Sometimes," she said. "We debrief. There's no one else who really gets it. It's all part of the job, babe." I nodded, mouth suddenly dry. "Okay." I didn't say, "I used to be the one you debriefed with." I didn't say, "Why does his approval matter so much to you?" Instead, I did what I always did. I swallowed my discomfort and told myself I was being insecure. Jealous, that guy. The thing about swallowing things is they don't disappear. They sit there, stuck between your ribs, quietly poisoning you. 6 months later, everything broke. We were at home on a Tuesday. That detail sticks with me for some reason. Tuesday, boring in-between day, I'd cooked. Stir-fry because it was cheap and fast. Lily was late. She texted, running over, start without me at 7:30. She walked in close to 9, eyes bright, hair slightly mussed. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "How was?" "Can we talk?" she said, dropping her bag by the door. Her voice had that thick sound like she'd either been crying recently or was about to. My stomach dropped. I turned the stove off, wiped my hands on a tea towel that suddenly felt too small. "Sure," I said. "What's up?" She didn't sit at the table. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed like she was cold, or bracing. "I don't know how to do this without sounding like an asshole," she said. "Try," I said, echoing some future version of myself I didn't know yet. She took a breath. "I'm not happy," she said. "I haven't been for a while." I felt the world tilt slightly. "Okay," I said slowly. "Is this about work because we can?" "It's not just work," she cut in. "It's everything, us, me, this life." She gestured vaguely around the apartment at our mismatched plates, the plant she kept forgetting to water. "What's wrong with our life?" I asked, hatting how defensive it sounded, like I was taking it personally when maybe I wasn't supposed to. It's small, she said, and flinched at her own word. Safe, predictable. We do the same things every week. We talk about the same stuff. You're content with that and I'm not. I didn't realize contentment was a crime now, I said, hurt sharpening my voice. She shook her head, tears spilling over now. See, this is why I didn't want to do this. I'm not saying you've done anything wrong. You're good. You're a good man, Ethan. You're kind. You show up. You cook stir-fry and buy me medicine when I'm sick and remember my mum's birthday. You're safe. That sounds like a compliment, I said. Why does it feel like an insult? Because it's not enough for me anymore, she whispered. Silence stretched, the fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, someone laughed too loudly on the street. Is there someone else? I asked, because that's the question you have to ask, even if you don't want the answer. She closed her eyes for a second. Not exactly, she said. What the hell does not exactly mean? I haven't cheated on you, she said quickly. Not physically, I swear, but I care about someone else. More than I should. I think about him, I compare, I wonder. Mark, I said, it wasn't a question. She let out a broken little laugh. You're not as oblivious as I thought, she said, wiping at her cheeks. Yeah, Mark. I felt like my veins were filled with ice. Okay, I said, because my body goes into weird calm when I'm in shock. Okay, so you what? You want to be with him? I don't know, she said. He's exciting. He makes me feel like I'm capable of more than this little life we built. This little life that you were also building, by the way, I snapped. I didn't trap you here, Lily. I know, she said, louder than I'd heard her speak in months. I know, that's the worst part. I chose this. I chose you, every time. And now I feel like I'm suffocating, and I don't know if it's because of us or because of me or because I've never done anything different. So you want to throw away 8 years, because you're having a quarter-life crisis, and your boss makes you feel special. That's not fair, she whispered. What's fair about this? I shot back. You holding my life in your hands and telling me it's not enough. We went in circles. She insisted she hadn't physically cheated. She admitted they'd been out for drinks, just us, more than she'd told me, that he'd confided in her about his divorce, that she'd told him things about our relationship she hadn't told me. Emotional affair textbook. At one point she said, he makes me feel seen, and I almost laughed because I'd been looking at her every day for 8 years. In the end, she said the line I knew was coming, but still didn't know how to brace for. I think I need to leave, she said. Not just for him, for me. I need to know who I am without you. So she packed a bag, that night, left the stir-fry congealing on the stove, walked out with a duffel slung over her shoulder. She didn't go straight to him, she insisted. She went to a friend. Then, a few weeks later, I saw a photo of them together on Instagram. At some pop-up exhibition, his hand at the small of her back, her leaning in. I unfollowed her that day, blocked him, blocked the agency's account, spent the next few months oscillating between numb and furious. I did therapy, picked up running again. Started cooking for one, which feels like a metaphor and also a logistical skill you don't realize you've lost until you're scraping leftovers into Tupperware alone. Mutual friends split down predictable lines. Some stayed in touch with both of us. Some chose her, some chose me. A few tried to stay neutral in that annoying way where they'd text me screenshots of her posts and say things like, crazy how life works, huh? Life stubbornly went on. I got promoted, moved into a smaller place because I couldn't afford our old rent alone, bought the same cheap plates again because some part of me wanted to prove to myself that I could make a home from scratch. I dated a bit, nothing serious. A few dinners that ended with polite hugs and we should do this again, texts that we both knew were lies. I kept thinking of Lily's face when she said, "You're safe," like it was a sentence. 1.5 years passed. Enough time that the breakup stopped being breaking news and turned into background lore. The few times her name came up in conversation, it was typically followed by, "She seems really happy now," or "Her and that dude moved in together, did you hear?" I didn't ask questions. I assumed eventual marriage. People like that don't blow up their lives for a fling, they blow them up for a narrative. Which brings us to last Saturday. Our mutual friend Hannah turned 30. Big milestone, big party. She booked out the back section of a bar in the city, hired a DJ, sent a group message to basically everyone we've ever known in the last decade. When the invite came through, I hovered over the RSVP for a solid 10 minutes. I knew Lily would be there. Hannah told me gently when she called to personally check if I was coming. "You don't have to," she said. "No pressure, I know it might be a lot." Is she bringing him? I asked, because of course I did. Yeah, Hannah said, they're engaged now, actually. I forced my voice to stay level. Oh, wow, okay, good for them. Silence crackled down the line. I'd really like you to be there, Hannah said. You're my friend too, and it's my party and I'm selfish, and I want all my people in the same room, but I also don't want you to spiral, so think on it. I went, partly out of stubbornness, partly because the idea of continuing to structure my life around avoiding my ex and her fiancé made me feel pathetic. I spent too long getting ready, trying to find that sweet spot between doing great and trying too hard. Ended up in the same black shirt I wear to every semi-nice thing. My hands were shaking when I locked my front door. I almost turned around twice on the way there. The bar was already busy when I arrived. Hannah had decorated the back area with balloons and photos from every stage of her life. There were uni shots up there, me with terrible hair, Lily laughing with a drink in hand. Our arms slung around each other like we had no idea how fragile all of it was. I was 3 sips into my first drink when I saw her. She walked in on his arm, jeans and a simple white top somehow looking more put together than half the room. Her hair was shorter now, curling just above her shoulders. The ring on her finger caught the light as she reached up to push a strand behind her ear. He was in a dark green shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent, hand at the small of her back in that way I remembered too well. I felt winded, not because she looked particularly different, but because she looked so familiar in a life that had moved on without me. Hannah spotted her, squealed, ran over. There was hugging, laughing, introductions to the DJ. I considered bolting. Instead, I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror like I was about to walk on stage. When I came back out, she found me before I could find a corner to melt into. Ethan, she said, voice soft but steady. Hey, I said, it came out more casual than I felt. She stepped in for a hug, and for a second I froze. Then my body did what it remembered, and my arms folded around her in a quick, awkward embrace. We both pulled back too fast, like we'd been shocked. You look good, she said, eyes flicking over me quickly. So do you, I said, and it wasn't a lie. This is Aaron, she said, turning slightly. He gave me a polite, measured smile, hand outstretched. Good to meet you, he said. His grip was firm, the kind of handshake men give each other when they're silently measuring something. I shook his hand and tried not to think about the fact that this was the man who'd been the fantasy version of more while I was cooking stir-fry alone. You too, I said, because what else do you say? You won. We did the small talk dance. Work, traffic, how we knew Hannah. He didn't seem like a terrible guy. That somehow made it worse. Villains are easier to hate. Eventually, someone called him over to the bar, and he kissed Lily on the temple before he went, like they'd rehearsed it. Want a drink? She asked me. I'm good, I said, lifting my beer. We stood there for a second in the noisy pause before the DJ switched tracks. That's when she said it. I still think about you, she blurted, then quieter, a lot actually. My brain did a weird echo thing. He was still close enough that he could have turned around and seen her face. Her hand was still resting on his sleeve like a reflex. What? I said, because how else do you respond when someone tosses a lit match onto the oil spill of your shared past? She glanced at Aaron, then back at me. Her voice was low. Us, she said. Our life, the stupid little things, Tuesday nights, your terrible Spotify playlists. Something twisted in my chest. You left, I heard myself say, as if she needed reminding. I know, she said quickly. God, I know, I'm not saying this to mess with you. Then what are you saying? She exhaled a shaky breath. I didn't expect seeing you to feel like this, she said. I thought it's been almost 2 years. I thought it would just be, hi, how are you, nice to see you. But then you walked in and it was like my brain split-screened. Split-screened? Yeah, she said, words tumbling out faster now. Like one side was this life, him, my job, our plans, and the other side was everything we had. The crappy little apartment above the cafe. The way you'd make me tea exactly how I like it without asking. The way you'd put your hand on my knee when I got ranty. It just hit me. That's called nostalgia, I said, maybe harsher than I meant. It's what happens when you burn your old life down and then smell something that reminds you of it. She winced. I deserve that, she said. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I haven't forgotten. You weren't just some stage I had to get through to get here. You're someone I still think about. You're engaged, I said, gesturing at her left hand. I know, she whispered. And you're telling your ex that you still think about him while your fiancé is 10 meters away, I said. You hear how that sounds, right? Tears flickered at the corners of her eyes. I shouldn't have said anything, she said. I always do this. Say the thing in my head out loud and then watch everything catch fire. Why did you? I asked. Say it. She shrugged helplessly. Because I'm an idiot. Because I saw you across the room and my chest did this stupid thing, and I realized I've been shoving thoughts of you into a mental cupboard and slamming the door, and they've been leaking out anyway. This isn't fair, I said, swallowing hard. You can't have it both ways, Lily. You chose him. You chose more. You don't get to stand there in his arms and tell me you still think about the life you decided wasn't enough. Her face crumpled. I know, she said again. I needed to say it somewhere to someone who would understand what I meant. I don't know what you mean, I said. Do you regret leaving? She hesitated. That hesitation said more than any paragraph could. I don't regret changing my life, she said slowly. I needed to know who I was outside of us. I needed to leave a relationship I'd been in since my early 20s and see if I could stand on my own 2 feet. I think that was necessary, but I regret how I did it. I regret hurting you the way I did. I regret letting things with Mark blur lines instead of dealing with my shit honestly. And now, I asked, you still with him? She shook her head. We crashed and burned 6 months after I moved out, she said. He was never it. He was just the exit sign I ran towards. I told you I didn't go straight to him. That was technically true. I went to my friend, then I went to him. Then I realized he was just another version of the same pattern. And Aaron, I nodded towards the man at the bar. She looked over at him and for a moment her face softened. He's kind, steady, wants similar things. It's quieter with him, in a good way. Then what are you doing? I asked, genuinely confused now. Why are you risking that quiet for this conversation? She blinked back tears. Because I'm still trying to make sense of the fact that I can love parts of both lives, she said. That I can want the stability I have with Aaron and still miss the version of myself I was with you. I thought maybe you feel that too, that you think about me sometimes. Of course I do, I said before I could stop myself. You were my whole 20s, you don't just erase that. I walk past a cafe we used to go to and I think of you. A song comes on and I think of you. I cook stir-fry and I think of the night you left it on the stove and walked out. My throat tightened. But I'm not going to walk up to you at your engagement party in 10 years and say that while you're holding your husband's hand. I didn't think. Exactly, I cut in. You didn't think. You rarely do when it comes to other people's hearts. You feel something intense and you follow it and then apologize later. I can't be on the receiving end of that again. She wiped at her cheeks, mascara smudging. You're right, she whispered. I am so sorry, Uthan. I didn't come over here planning to say that. It just slipped out, like everything with you always has. We stood there in the noise, 2 people who used to know everything about each other, suddenly strangers again. Look, I said finally softer. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you found a life that fits you better. I won't lie, it still hurts when I think about how we got here, but I'm working on it. Therapy, long walks, bad dating apps, and yeah, I still think about you. How could I not? Her eyes searched my face. So what do we do with that? She asked. Nothing, I said. We do nothing with it. We let it be a fact, not a plan. You go back to your fiancé and your life. I go back to mine. Maybe one day we run into each other at a grocery store and it doesn't feel like this. That sounds sane, she said, a sad little smile tugging at her mouth. We could use some sanity, I said. We never really had much of that when we were together. She huffed a wet laugh. No, she said. We were all intensity and no breaks. Exactly, I said, and look where that got us. She nodded slowly. Can I hug you? She asked. I hesitated, then nodded. She stepped forward, arms wrapping around me. For a second, my body remembered every version of that embrace. The one after bad days, the one before parties, the one when we were half asleep. It hurt in a way I don't have good words for. I'm sorry, she whispered against my shoulder. I know, I said. We pulled apart. She wiped at her cheeks, took a breath, and put her ring hand back on Aaron's arm as she walked away. I watched him tilt his head to ask if she was okay, watched her nod and smile in that way that tells you everything and nothing. I lasted another 20 minutes at the party, long enough to sing badly when Henna's cake came out, long enough to hug her and blame my early exit on an early start tomorrow. Then I walked out into the cool night, lungs greedy for air that didn't smell like beer and old memories. I sat in my car for 15 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for listening, I won't bother you again. L. I stared at it for a long time, then I deleted it, not out of anger but because I knew if I replied, even just a "you're welcomer," it would open some little channel between us again. and I am so tired of being the person she reaches for when she feels something complicated. I'm not going to pretend I drove home feeling empowered and whole. I cried in the car like some sad movie clusher. I played the same song on repeat and let myself feel every ugly, conflicting thing: anger, longing, relief, nostalgia. The next day, I booked an extra session with my therapist, sat on her couch, and told her the whole story. "How did it feel hearing her say she still thinks about you?" she asked. "Like validation and a slap in the face at the same time," I said. Like, part of me went, "See, you weren't crazy, it meant something," and another part went, "Cool, and what exactly am I supposed to do with that now that she's engaged to someone else?" "What did you want deep down in that moment?" she asked. I stared at the carpet. Part of me wanted her to say, "I made a mistake, I picked the wrong life, I want you back," I admitted. And another part of me was horrified at the idea, because I remember how it felt when she walked out, and I don't think I could ever trust her in the same way again. "So you're grieving two things," my therapist said. "The relationship you had, and the version of it you'd still secretly hoped might return one day." Her words poked at that second grief. "Yeah," I said. "It's like she came up and tapped the glass on a museum exhibit of my past, and then walked away." We talked about boundaries, about how I'd actually done pretty well in the moment by not taking the bait, by namming what wasn't fair, about how I was allowed to feel everything I was feeling without making it mean I was still stuck or pathetic. That's the thing I'm slowly getting my head around. Missing someone, thinking about someone, doesn't automatically mean you want them back. It just means they were woven into your life in a way that left marks. Lily will probably always be there, in some corner of my brain. When I make stir-fry, when I hear a song from that bar under the bridge, when I pass an ad campaign that looks like her work. She was my 20s, my first real grown-up relationship. The person who taught me what it felt like to build a life with someone and what it felt like when that life fell apart. I'm allowed to honor that without turning it into a what if I carry around like a security blanket. If you've read this far, I don't really have tidy advice. I'm not here to say never date a creative director, or once a cheater, always a cheater, or whatever bumper sticker wisdom people like to throw at this kind of story. People are messier than that. Lily isn't evil. She's selfish sometimes, impulsive often, and still figuring herself out. So am I. What I am learning, though, is this. If someone chooses a life without you, not in a moment of anger, but in a considered packed-a-bag-and-left way, you have to believe them. You have to build your life on that fact, not on the hope that they'll wake up one day and realize their mistake. Otherwise, you end up in a bar years later, hearing "I still think about you," and mistaking it for a promise instead of what it is. A ghost rattling chains in a house you no longer live in. I'm trying to leave that house, to notice the ghost without inviting it to sit on the couch, to acknowledge that, yeah, sometimes I still think about her too, but I also think about who I might become with someone who doesn't need to blow everything up to figure out what they want. One day maybe someone will hold me in a crowded bar and say, "I still think about you," and it will mean, I choose you over and over, even when life gets weird. Until then, I'm choosing myself. And honestly, that's more than I thought I'd be capable of when she walked out of the kitchen that Tuesday night and left the stir-fry burning.